The air is thick. It tastes of dust, disinfectant, and the sweet rot of dysentery. Distant explosions rattle the flimsy walls, a constant percussion reminding you that the world outside is ending. This is the grammar of war. Simple. Brutal. There is us, and there is them. For the women trapped in the Santo Tomas internment camp, this was gospel. They were the debris of a collapsing empire, abandoned and starving, and their enemy, the American devils, were coming. They had been taught what to expect: vengeance, a fate worse than death. But what they got was something else entirely, something that would shatter their world. If you find these hidden stories of history compelling, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments below. February 1945. Manila is a city being torn apart. Inside the 21-hectare campus of Santo Tomas University, another war has raged for 3 long years. A war against hunger. Akiko Tanaka was 22 years old, a nurse from Nagasaki. She came to Manila filled with patriotic fire, ready to serve the emperor. Now, service meant surviving. Her world had shrunk to a shanty built from scrap wood. Her reality was the daily ration, a watery rice gruel, sometimes with weeds boiled in for flavor. Food was not a pleasure. It was a desperate calculation. Every spilled grain was a tragedy. At night, they would whisper about food, forbidden lovers, the salty tang of ramen, the sweetness of a red bean cake. These memories were a form of torture. They were citizens of an empire that now refused to acknowledge they existed, left to starve by the very men they were told were their protectors. To be captured was the ultimate shame, but here the line between honor and survival had been erased, ground into the dust that coated everything. Then the rumors started. The Americans were close. The Japanese guards grew more erratic. The propaganda films spooled through their minds. Monstrous American soldiers, giants with red faces and cruel eyes. On the evening of February 3rd, the ground began to tremble. The roar of engines became a deafening physical force. It was not artillery. It was something else, something coming for them. They braced for the demonic figures of their nightmares to burst through the gates. An M4 Sherman tank did not knock. It smashed through the main gates. The chaos was terrifying. Then, a strange silence fell. A tall American soldier, no older than 20, peered into their barracks. His face was smeared with grime. His eyes were not cruel. They were tired and shocked. He saw not the enemy, but a room of skeletal, starving women. He muttered something to his comrade. Minutes later, he returned. He was not carrying a rifle. He was carrying a crate. He knelt. He pushed the crate forward and backed away, his hands held up to show he meant no harm. Inside were K rations, cans of meat, crackers, and small, rectangular bars wrapped in brown paper. Chocolate. For Akiko, that first bite was a sensory explosion. The sweetness was so intense, so alien, after years of bland gruel. It was almost painful. It was the taste of a forgotten world. The taste of mercy. This was not the act of a demon. It was the act of a human being. The days that followed were a dizzying blur. The Americans set up field hospitals. They dug latrines. And they brought in food. Mountains of it. Cans of peaches, bags of flour, jars of a strange brown paste they called peanut butter. One afternoon, a truck rolled in, carrying large canvas bags and hoses, a portable field shower. The feeling of hot water and soap, washing away 3 years of filth and humiliation, was a baptism, a return to the world of the living. But the kindness felt wrong. It was a weapon they did not understand. Kindness from their Japanese guards was always a prelude to cruelty, a new form of mockery, a test. They ate the food, but their eyes remained watchful. They used the soap, but their minds remained suspicious. This had to be a trick. A long, complicated game whose rules they did not yet know. It was impossible for an enemy to be this human. The generosity was a kind of psychological warfare. Akiko watched a young American soldier complain that his canned ham was too salty. He tossed half of it into a trash bin. Akiko froze. That half a can contained more calories than she had consumed in 3 days. It was an act of casual abundance so profound it felt like a physical blow. The waste was a language she could not comprehend. They were given strange foods. The brown paste called peanut butter was the most baffling. They examined it, sniffing it cautiously. Was it a type of miso? A medicine? A young girl, brave and desperate, tasted it. Her face contorted, a mix of confusion and delight. The salty, sticky, sweet flavor had no precedent in their memory. It was the taste of another planet. The numbers told the story. A 1944 Red Cross report stated the daily ration under the Japanese had fallen below 700 calories. It was a scientific formula for starvation. The American K ration, by contrast, provided nearly 3,000 calories. The Hershey's D ration bar alone, designed to survive tropical heat, was a 600-calorie brick of life. American factories had produced over 3 billion of them. 3 billion. The number was an abstraction. The chocolate melting on her tongue was real. If this strange collision of worlds surprises you, subscribe to our channel to uncover more forgotten histories. Then came the sounds. A soldier set up a small radio. From it spilled a chaotic, rhythmic noise. Horns wailed and drums stuttered. The Americans called it jazz. To Akiko, it sounded like joyous anarchy. It was the opposite of the rigid, patriotic anthems of home. It was the sound of a people who were not afraid to be messy, to be loud, to be free. They brought bottles of a dark, bubbling liquid, Coca-Cola. The shape of the bottle was famous even in Japan, a symbol of American decadence. To hold one, cold and sweating with condensation, felt like holding a forbidden artifact. The taste was another shock, sweet, sharp, and alive with fizz. It was frivolous, and in its frivolity, it was a profound statement. Her nation was fighting a holy war of sacrifice and spiritual purity. The enemy drank sugar water that fizzed. This kindness was a slow-acting poison to her soul. Every meal was a betrayal. Every clean bandage was an act of treason. She saw the faces of her brothers, her cousins, soldiers in the Imperial Army. Were they eating? Or were they starving in a jungle, still loyal, still fighting? Her survival felt like a stain on their sacrifice. To accept the enemy's food was to admit her own leaders had failed her. It was to agree that the demons were not demonic at all. One afternoon, the ultimate absurdity arrived. A group of soldiers, bored in the lull of fighting, cleared a patch of dusty ground. They produced a worn leather ball and a wooden bat. They began to play a game. Baseball. They laughed and shouted. It was a spectacle of such normalcy it was insane. Here, in the ruins of a city, surrounded by death, they played a children's game. A soldier, a young corporal with a wide smile, noticed them watching. He motioned to Akiko. He tossed the ball gently toward her. It landed at her feet. She looked at the ball, then at him. He was the enemy. He had likely killed her countrymen, and he was asking her to play catch. She felt the eyes of the other women on her. This was a line. To pick up that ball was to cross it. It was to participate in the enemy's world, to accept their culture, their peace, their game, while the war still raged just beyond the walls. It was a choice between a past defined by honor and starvation, and a present offering mercy and shame. Slowly, she bent down and picked up the ball. It felt heavy in her hand, heavy with impossible questions. She realized with a clarity that chilled her to the bone that she had felt more dignity in these few days as a prisoner than she had in the last year as a citizen of the Japanese Empire. The game ended. The sun set. The questions began. As Akiko walked back to her shanty, the simple joy of the game curdled into something else, guilt, a cold, creeping shame. She had played with the enemy. She had laughed with them. Each calorie of American food rebuilding her body felt like it was dismantling her soul. The propaganda had been a fortress. It protected her from doubt. Now the walls were breached. The Americans seemed to understand this. They saw the vacant stares, the lingering fear. They knew that saving the body was only the first step. They had to liberate the mind. A few days later, they gathered the women in a large, hastily cleared hall. An American officer stood before a projection screen. Beside him stood a translator, a young Japanese-American soldier whose face was a confusing map of familiar features in a foreign accent. The officer did not speak of victory or defeat. He spoke of numbers. He spoke of steel production, millions of tons. He spoke of aircraft carriers, dozens of them sliding from American shipyards every few months. He spoke of the B-29 Superfortress, a bomber that could fly higher and faster than any Japanese fighter. He told them that America was producing more airplanes in a single week than Japan could produce in an entire year. The numbers were meaningless, astronomical. They were a different language of war. The Japanese war was one of spirit, of sacrifice. The American war was one of mathematics, an equation of industrial might that could only have one answer. Then, the projector whirred to life. The first images were of American cities, New York, Chicago, endless streams of cars, women in bright dresses, laughing. There was no sign of war, no rationing, no fear. It was a world of impossible abundance. The casual waste Akiko had seen in the thrown-away ham was not an anomaly. It was a national identity. The next film was different. The images were grainy, chaotic. Chinese characters filled the screen. Nanking. The narrator's voice turned grim. The film showed Japanese soldiers, not the noble warriors of the propaganda films. These men were different. Akiko saw images that her mind refused to process. Piles of bodies, women weeping, soldiers grinning over decapitated heads. A collective gasp went through the room. A trick, a clever American fabrication. It had to be. But the images kept coming. Footage of the Bataan Death March. Skeletal American and Filipino prisoners, bayoneted and beaten by their Japanese captors just a few miles from where they now sat. Akiko felt sick. The Hershey bar she had eaten that morning rose in her throat. She looked at the faces of her countrymen on the screen. She tried to see her brother, her cousins. She saw only monsters. The demons were real, but they were not American. The lights came up. No one moved. The silence was absolute, broken only by a single woman's soft, uncontrollable sobbing. The fortress had not just been breached. It had been leveled. They were standing in the rubble of their own beliefs. In the days that followed, a new sickness spread through the camp. Not dysentery, but despair. The food was plentiful, but some women refused to eat. Survival now felt like a curse. To live was to accept the truth of those films. To live was to be complicit. One night, a scream cut through the darkness. A young woman from Yokohama had tried to hang herself with a strip of blanket. They cut her down just in time. Akiko helped hold her as she thrashed and wept, screaming about honor, about the shame of living. Akiko looked into the girl's wild eyes and saw her own reflection. What was honor? Was it dying for an empire that starved you and lied to you? An empire that committed the atrocities she had seen on that screen? Or was there another kind of honor? The honor of endurance. The dignities in simply choosing to live, to bear witness. The next afternoon, the young corporal with the wide smile found her sitting alone. He offered her a stick of chewing gum. She took it, unwrapping the strange, sweet-smelling strip. He sat beside her. He pulled a worn, creased photograph from his pocket. A smiling woman and two small children stood in front of a small wooden house. "My family," he said, pointing. "In Ohio." He did not need the translator. The word was universal. He spoke of his son's first baseball game, of his daughter's fear of thunderstorms. He was not a demon. He was not a statistic of industrial might. He was a boy who missed his mother and was tired of war. He was just like her brother. The thought was a physical blow. Her brother. Was he alive? Was he one of the grinning soldiers in the film? Or was he starving in a jungle somewhere, still believing the lies? That evening, an American truck arrived, carrying something more precious than food or medicine. Mailbags. They were filled with letters from Japan, letters intercepted by the Americans and held for months, even years. A soldier called her name. Akiko Tanaka. He handed her a single thin envelope. The paper was yellowed and brittle. The address was written in her mother's familiar, elegant script. It had been posted over a year ago. She stared at it, her hands trembling. This was a message from a world that no longer existed. A world where she was a proud daughter of the empire, and the Americans were devils. To open it was to confront the ghost of the person she used to be. She did not know if she was strong enough to read what was inside. Her fingers traced the faded characters, a ghost's touch. The letter was a relic from a buried civilization, the one that existed in her mind before the tanks broke through the gate. Inside was the voice of her mother, a voice of faith in the Emperor, of pride in her daughter's service, of certainty in their divine victory. A voice from the heart of the lie. She tore it open. The words were full of love. In propaganda, her mother wrote of neighborhood rationing with patriotic cheer, of the glorious spirit of the homeland. She asked if Akiko was making the Emperor proud. Each sentence was a small, sharp blade. Her mother did not know she was writing to a daughter who had been left to starve, a daughter who now ate the enemy's food and played the enemy's games. Akiko folded the letter. She did not cry. The tears belonged to a different person, a girl who had died somewhere in the dust of Santo Tomas. The letter did not pull her back. It severed the last thread. The truth was not that the Americans were kind. The truth was that her own world had been a cage built of beautiful, honorable lies. When the war ended, there was no celebration, just a quiet, exhausted stillness. The Japanese civilians were separated from the military, processed, and eventually placed on ships bound for home. The journey across the Pacific was the reverse of the one she had made years before, filled not with hope and patriotic fire, but with a silent, hollow dread. They were ghosts returning to a graveyard. She returned to Nagasaki, or what was left of it. The city of her childhood had been erased by a flash of light she could not comprehend. She found what was left of her family. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She was a survivor. But in a culture that glorified noble death, survival was a complicated, almost shameful thing. She tried to tell them. She tried to speak of the starvation under the Japanese guards. She tried to describe the American corporal from Ohio who showed her his family's picture. She spoke of the impossible sweetness of a Hershey bar given in mercy. They did not want to hear it. Her story was an inconvenience. It did not fit into the neat narrative of their own suffering and victimhood. To accept the enemy's humanity was to be forced to question their own. And so they fell silent. Akiko learned to be silent, too. She locked the ghosts of Santo Tomas inside her, along with the memory of a baseball game played in the ruins of a war. She lived a long life. But the true paradox, the one that haunted her sleep for decades, was not the defeat. It was not the hunger. It was not even the atomic bomb that had vaporized her home. The single greatest shock of the war, the wound from which she never truly recovered, was an act of unexpected grace. The simple, inexplicable kindness of her enemy. It was a mercy so profound it felt heavier than any cruelty, a truth so sharp it cut deeper than any bayonet. It was a question she could never answer, offered with a stick of gum and a game of catch. If you believe these forgotten stories need to be told, support our channel by liking this video and subscribing. In the comments below, tell us what part of this story will stay with you the most.